So this is Michelle Stuart, who I had introduced briefly earlier. We're going to just be walking through a bit of her work as a way to first acclimate us to the conversation, but also to think about various aspects, I believe, of your practice, well, I hope, from the early days up until today. But as we do that, I think it would be important for us to consider forms of support and ways of which you had to look to realize these work, whether that was through money or funders or collectors, all the various attributes of how you had to go about things. I guess we'll begin. Is that okay?
Do you want me to answer that right
Yeah.
now?
I mean, well, no, I think as we go, it might be nice, because I think
All right.
each and every piece probably has its
Okay.
own answer. But maybe we'll even start from the beginning. So just a little bit more about Michelle. She grew up in Los Angeles, and she attended the city's Chouinard Art Institute, which is now the California Institute of the Arts. You worked as a topological draftsperson, a position that very much followed in the footsteps of your father, and who, I believe, mapped the water lines in California's deserts. Is that correct? No? Okay. Well, that's what I have. Sorry. Well, he did, not you. Yeah. You then moved to Mexico in the early 1950s, and you worked as a studio assistant for Diego Rivera, which I do know is correct. Yeah, mural assistant, yes. And then in 57 you moved here, and you've been here ever since, or primarily here, in and out. You went to Paris, and then you came, yes, exactly. In between Mexico and New York, she went to Paris, but she's been here primarily ever since. So maybe as we go through your work, you can just share more about those early years,
Which early years?
Well, as we go through, thinking about it through the lens of your work. How's that? So maybe talk us through these early pieces, since you can see them a bit better than I from this angle. You want to begin?
Well, what can I say? I mean, a lot of these boxes that I did came out of sculptural boxes that I did that we're not going to look at, which were done in the 60s, which were plaster boxes. And, well, they were wood boxes with plaster sculpture in them. And then they developed into what you're seeing, the earth boxes. And the one that one in particular was, a earth box that was kind of just my hand. So it was the sculpture in the 60s were my body. So that predates the involvement with the earth. And then there were moon drawings at the same time. I think we may have a moon drawing.
Well, if we don't, do you mind sharing? Yeah. This moves just a little bit further.
Moon drawings predated the scrolls. I think we reduced this slide talk. The frottage pieces are pieces that were done on the earth, and they came from fault line pieces that I did also on the earth, where there were fault lines. And because when I was doing the moon drawings, I was very interested in the emanations that the moon had on us.
And were the moon drawings similar? No, they were very different.
No, there were actually very explicit drawings of the moon. And I wrote NASA for photographs, and they sent me a bunch of photographs, and I used them, and I used them in drawings, and I used them as reference points. And since I had worked as a cartographer, it was very easy for me to translate aerial photographs. So these are the frottage pieces, and they're meant. The floor pieces are meant to engage the viewer physically. There's
Maybe we can skip to the
kinesthetic. Can you see it?
Yeah. I was going to skip along to the other ones. You can keep talking. So you can see here how they roll onto the ground, is what she's been mentioning.
Some of them went 20 feet out into the ground.
There's a...
You just missed one.
Yeah, I skipped one. This is a different
That
piece.
one was about rain and wind and how things change while they're. It's about time more than anything else. And these pieces are kind of the beginning of my interest in time as much as Earth or any other.
How do you mean? In terms
Well,
of,
I was interested in how time changes things.
in terms of the process of bringing the
Its
earth?
process,
Yeah, its
yeah.
process.
Yeah. I'm very interested in that. I still am interested in that.
Yeah.
I think time is probably maybe the salient characteristic of a lot of the work.
And with the moon drawings, for instance, the idea of time you really brought into this sort of universal or celestial time. And that also carries forth in a couple of works we're going to see that are in the landscape. Okay. Maybe we want to talk a little bit about this before we move to the earthworks?
All along, not so much in the last few years, but beginning in the early 70s, I did book object pieces that were about time as well, because they were geological time. And they were stratified. Some of them you couldn't open, and they were kind of a metaphor for what we don't know about the earth and the silent
And can you just
secrets of the earth.
maybe describe the piece for everyone as a...
Well, they can see it. It's earth.
Yes, okay. But your idea of the book maybe is an interesting concept in terms of how you've, the structure of the piece and also the material itself.
It's meant to be layered and stratified and rubbed by me.
Great.
And basically, it's about time. Well, I mean, I feel that.
Well, I think it incorporates your own process of time, correct? The layers of the work, the materials, but bringing the land itself, of course, is, as you said, the geologic time. But I think it's also maybe interesting to think about permanence and impermanence as well with these early works, especially as we're going to move and talk about the earthworks. You want to talk a little bit about that? Because I know you have mentioned the idea that you bring that into your thinking around these works in terms of how permanent you view them.
The works that I've done.
Yeah, maybe even, for instance, this.
Well, this is very different from the works that I've done outside, because this was meant to be brought inside. And the scrolls were meant to be brought inside, though worked outside. However, the so-called, because I didn't call them that, earthworks that were done outside.
What did you call them?
Remain outside.
Yeah, we can go to some of
Yes,
them. Yeah.
this was a perfect example. It was at Art Park in 1975, and this was the original
And that's
place.
in Niagara, up by the Niagara.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to give context, that's all. So is everyone familiar with Art Park? Do you want to share a little bit more about what Art Park was and how that commission came about?
Well, they say it was a Smithsonian idea, and I took it to be that. I think some people wanted to do pieces up there that they took with them. But the idea was a beautiful idea. It was all about taking what had been literally a dump, and it
Doesn't
had
look so
been-
much
I
like
mean,
a dump,
it had been
but-
more than a dump. It had been a
Yeah.
refuse
Yeah,
pile.
yeah. Oh, sorry.
And making it, for me anyway, I'm speaking about my concept of it, an impermanent piece in the land. And this one lasted, fortunately, about a week, but it was about 460 feet of earth rubbed and smashed heavy paper that was muslin backed, and the color was the strata from one of the layers of time in this escarpment. So it was twofold or threefold in terms of time, because the Niagara Falls had been in this escarpment about 12,000 years earlier, and the coloration on this piece was a stratification from this escarpment. There were many different stratifications, but I took the one that I thought was the most beautiful and smashed the rocks into the surface of the paper. And then the paper wasn't this long, so they had to be sewn in 30-foot stretches, and then they were brought down. And it was meant to be seen just while it was up there.
So when you say it was around for a week, or it was on view for a week, did it disappear?
Yes.
It just
It disappeared.
disintegrated.
Well, a big wind came along.
And took it with.
And that was it.
Yeah. So for context, I'm sure many of you know what Art Park was, but it was and they have a wonderful website now, as of a few years ago, where you can see all the lists of artists that were commissioned to be a part of these projects. And it only lasted for a few years in the 70s, I believe, or actually through to the 80s, I believe, early 80s.
Muddled through a little longer.
Yeah, it kind of like,
Yeah.
it was dragged along a bit, but the early years, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it was the park was Rockefeller given. And
To be used for
and
these
supported.
commissions, exactly. But some of these commissions, I want to make note, for this particular commission for you, this was something you had to self-fund or find your own way of realizing, is that right? Or did they give you money?
No, they flew us up. And if I remember correctly, I actually am a little not sure about this. They paid for my trip and my stay, and I think they paid for the paper.
Okay.
So,
Materials.
the materials.
Okay.
Yeah, and that was it.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you had mentioned to me, I think, that some other artists might have had a team that arrived with them.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Well, it was a learning experience for me because I'd never done an outdoor piece before. And I didn't bring a team.
But others did.
I didn't bring a writer. I didn't bring a helicopter. I didn't bring a photographer. And I didn't bring an assistant. So many of the artists that were working up there on the same gig time helped me with the piece.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah, it was very generous of a lot of the males.
So
This is a piece that never got done. I mean, it was
An unrealized
it was
work.
an idea that a woman, I can't remember her name now, but she was cultural director of New York City for a brief time in that period. And she wanted to take that Breezy Point Park and have artists do pieces there, and that was, and it was a very interesting proposal, I thought, because there was it had been during the war that they had put up bunkers in case the Germans landed, and they were very unsightly, ugly bunkers, and so my idea was to change the bunker into a mountain with indigenous plants, and then have the inside, which is where soldiers had turrets, have the water come down as a waterfall and into a pool. So I wanted to make it into a magic spot, a nature spot.
Two questions. So why wasn't it realized? But also, we sort of skipped over your turn to the outdoor with the art park work. So for instance, art park, and then also then this work, you had made a turn to the outdoor. I was curious how and why that happened, or what your curiosity was. I mean, obviously you were working with the land and bringing it in the interior with the works we saw earlier, But for instance,
Well, this didn't get made.
no.
So this
And why
remained-
didn't it get made? Is that just
Because they chose 4 artists, and the 4 artists did proposals, and then the person that wanted to do it contacted, which she should have done at the beginning, but didn't apparently, the Parks Department.
okay? Of
And
course.
the Parks Department didn't want it done. So, yeah.
We're familiar with that bureaucracy quite a bit. Yeah, yeah. They don't always
Well,
talk to
it
each
turns out
other.
It's the only national park.
Oh, in New York
Yes,
City?
it wasn't
Oh.
a New York, that's the other problem.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is also part of the scrolls. This one, for instance, is on view at Dia Beacon. It's part of our collection now. So that's a bit more on that. I'm going to skip to this.
Now, here's another case in point.
Yeah.
This was really about time. When I got a lot of grants.
There we go. Yes, I want you to talk about
I
that.
guess because I was always poor.
There's a lot of labor involved in writing grants. Yes.
And for some reason or another, I was very fortunate. I got, in the early 70s, I got the Guggenheim, and I got 2 or 3 national endowments, and then New York State had grants, and I got a few of those. And in one of the grants, they said, would you like to do something which you've never worked with before? And I said, yes, I wanted very much to do a video. And I wanted to do a video about the change of Earth after it's been raped, you know, which it had here. So I hired a helicopter, and I went around New York State looking for land that was really damaged tremendously by industry. And this had been a Martin Marietta quarry. And so, fortunately, there was no one there but a caretaker. And I cajoled him into allowing me to work there. And so I did this piece, which was a video piece, which was about time and strata. And you can see there are strata marks where I dug, and examples of different strata from each layer of stratification for many, many feet. And the lengths of the paper with the earth on it, it's a little hard to see, but if you look carefully, it's got 3 different layers that go all the way down to the base of the quarry, which I wanted to go back and film every year to see how the nature was returning to the site. And I was not allowed to do that.
Just this once. So similarly, going back to this work, Sayreville Strata Quartet.
That's another site that was
yeah.
damaged, actually, by industry. It was a site in Sayreville, New Jersey, which no longer exists because developers have developed the whole area. But it was a 19th century brick factory, several of them. And a very well-known brick factory that made bricks for probably most of New England. And so their brick factory was there because the earth was so clay-like and beautiful.
Red, real red.
And made
yeah.
great bricks. So this was a mess. It was the brick factory. It was really an industrial waste site with pools and all kinds of stuff. So I kept going back there and getting earth and getting different layers of the stratas around the site. It was a large site.
You want to just talk us through a little bit about the process of making the scroll works?
Yeah.
Because there,
It was the earth there generally was fairly damp, so I had to do most of it by digging a lot of earth and taking it back to the studio and smashing it into the surface of this very heavy archival paper that was muslin backed, laminated, and smashing it. And then when the rocks broke up into smaller pieces, I would rub and rub and rub again and again. But I very carefully kept it even, of course, in terms of tonality and what I wanted in each piece.
how long do these take you?
I didn't.
Vary.
I didn't-
Yeah, you didn't time yourself.
I
Yeah.
don't- Yeah.
Again, time unmeasured. Yeah. Can you share where were they presented during this time period? Where were they presented, these works, in the early years? Because you had shared with me a little bit about the different receptions, say, in Europe versus the United States at that time.
I think I showed it first. At Droll Colbert. I actually don't remember whether it was Droll Colbert in 1977 or 8.
Okay. I'm more curious as to the reception that you had shared with me in terms of how the European collectors, individual collectors, seem to be a bit more bold in thinking through the idea
that
of...
was absolutely true.
Yeah.
I showed it in Soho in a gallery long gone named Max Hutchinson. And he got a call from a European dealer, Schmela in Dusseldorf, who had seen some of the works, and he wanted to do a show. And this was 1974, I think. And Max said, you talk to him, and I talked to him, and he didn't speak English very well, but I said, sure.
Yeah.
You know. And I said, Max, do you want to handle the show? And Max said, no, you handle the show. Nothing's going to come out of this anyway. And, you know, I had a show.
Vote of
in
confidence,
Düsseldorf, and
yeah.
sold out the show. And it was very interesting because it was extremely difficult to sell these works in the United States. I mean, almost impossible. Occasionally someone would buy one. But it was very rare, and people worried about longevity. They worried about their house cleaners. They worried about their children. They worried about their dogs.
Yeah.
But for some reason, the Germans didn't worry about anything. I mean, I saw most of them in Germany. Later on, also in the Scandinavian countries, but. For some reason or another, there was a big difference between the way we perceived of art and the leap that they were willing to take. And those works still exist.
Amazing.
I mean, they're still perfectly, you know.
Did you ever have any contact with those collectors? Ask them anything?
Well, I know Swerner bought a couple of them
From somebody?
from one of those collectors' estates.
Huh.
Because
And they're
you know,
still
a lot
in
of
good
those
condition.
collectors were older people, and they're gone now.
Yeah.
So their estates became available.
So maybe for the interest of time, we can...
What was the last one? Oh, that was.
This is, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I always took photographs of
I
all
want to talk about
all
your
the
photograph.
pieces.
Yeah.
And since the very beginning, and because I knew that most of them wouldn't last, I mean, the outdoor ones. And I was very interested in documenting what I was doing, and so I did it this way. This is the way I did it. I had a lot of grids of everything I did, and I still do. But I thought one example of it would be good here, because this was the piece that you couldn't see very well in the black and white photograph of the quarry.
Maybe I'm going to skip a little bit here. Here, I want to.
Well, this is one. Now, speaking of difficult to, pay for.
Yeah, this is.
Portland Center for the Visual Arts, which was run at the time by Mary Beebe, who does the Stuart collection today in Southern California. She wrote and asked me if I wanted to do a show, and I said I had just done a show in Seattle, thinking it was close, so, but it, of course.
Yeah.
And so I said, could I do a piece out in the land? And she said, well, we only have $2,000, and that includes your airfare, how many times you want to come out, and what, and where you'll be staying, and
the materials.
So this was done for $2,000 plus me. I mean, nothing. But I was flown out a couple of times, and they were really great, because they got me an assistant we camped out there for a week or two building this piece. They found a man who wanted to get rid of his boulders because his horses were tripping over them. He gave us his new white truck. So we took all the rocks we needed, and stones and boulders, and camped out there with the rattlesnakes. And we made a pact with them that we weren't going to put a boulder over a rattlesnake hole, and they didn't. They didn't bother us at all. And it was a really wonderful experience. And it was about time. It was a great big clock, and it was about when the solstice over the mountains rose, and that was the alignment that you see with the mountain.
There's also this drawing here, yeah.
And when it went down over the Cascades.
Well, the resourcefulness and I think the inventiveness of realizing these works is really integral to thinking about how you developed them, how you thought through them, and your dedication to that. How were you supporting yourself as an artist during that time?
I actually wasn't.
Yeah.
I mean, I would sell every once in a while, and that was it.
And you had to have it stretched.
And the grants.
And the grants, yeah. Which is a lot of effort, a lot of time.
Yeah. I mean, the grants where, so, if you did it correctly,
you were able to.
Didn't eat. Paid low maintenance. Yeah.
Okay, maybe just a couple more. I don't know how we're doing on time, but this is also beautiful. Part of the piece.
That's one of the drawings for the piece.
Yeah. Similar to the photography, you do sketches and other things that remain a part of it. I think that I've heard that some of this still remains. Is that correct? I've heard rumors that some of the piece still remains. People have made pilgrimages out here.
Yes, I've had letters from people who have gone out there, and journalists who have gone out to see the piece and said that there are parts of it that remain. I had no desire for it to remain in particular. I mean, it was meant to go back into the earth again after I did it. It remained for actually a few years. I mean, 1979, so it still has a few cairns, they tell me, and people have weddings out there.
Of course, it's destination. Speaking of sort of impermanence again, and the idea, this is a shoreline, correct?
Yes, well, this was another place that invited me to do an outdoor work, and it was in Nantucket. And I've always been really interested in the sea, So I said yes, because I wanted to do a piece that was about a voyage to the South Pacific. And I mean, it's a perfect place because it was a whaling island and whaling area. And so I imagined a ship that went down in a storm off the coast of Nantucket and what it would have in it if it washed up to shore. So I did about 200 sculptures out of hydrocal and structolite that were shaped as elements of a sailing ship, but also elements of the South Sea Islanders, which would have traded with the sailors. So I've kind of always been a Captain James Cook buff. And so I've read a lot of books on that subject. And I don't know if we can see them up close. Oh, this is a piece I did on an island as well in Finland. And this is also a boat. But I had every intention to do another piece, but when I got to the island, this was also no money involved. But when I got to the island, I found an elk. And the elk's head is hanging there in the tree, and all those things hanging in the tree are elk fur. And the boat is with handmade candles. And on Midsummer's Night, the boat, the winds make the candles bring the boat into the forest. And there, in the forest, there are stone boulders that have candles. So it's about...
Was it to be experienced, or did it exist for people?
Yeah, in a way.
Okay. But was it, were people to be present for this experience?
Oh,
was
yes.
It
was interesting because
an evening
for the whole time that we made the piece, there were about 5 people on the island.
Oh, wow.
But it happened that the night that the piece was finished was Midsummer Night. And on the island, they had put together a dance platform and hall. And millions of boats landed in the little harbor, and all these people got off, and they were all drinking and cavorting and dancing, and they all experienced this. I should never forget it. This was on their way to coming back from dancing and drinking into their boat. And it had a huge audience. I mean, really a huge audience. I mean...
I only ask because I think that's a part of this work. I think it's, as we were talking about the experience earlier, and also ways of support. I mean, a part of this was the question of who's going to see it, who will experience it, how will it be experienced, does it have the impact or the magnitude that, say, you know, a painting might have that has visitors to it every day.
It's so satisfying to conceive it and build it. I mean, that's my joy out of it. I mean, it sounds kind of...
No, I think that's the core.
But I loved to do these pieces. I mean, they were just, I considered myself very lucky to be able to do them. Now, this was an invitation. I had a show in Helsinki at a gallery. And the Finnish Art Association said, can she come back and do a piece in Finland? And that was the piece I did.
Fantastic.
I think, Kelly, I'm
yeah.
sorry, I'm going to
No
interrupt
worries.
you.
We can
I'm
wait
having
for
an
questions.
amazing time.
Yeah.
And we could go on forever.